Vladimir Putin's visit to Beijing was mainly shown with footage of Xi Jinping greeting him in Red Square and Chinese children waving Chinese and Russian flags. But behind the scenes, there were two dimensions to this summit. On one hand, Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping signed a declaration on working together towards a multipolar world, and Xi Jinping even began openly criticizing Donald Trump and his approach to national security. It even got to the point where Xi Jinping publicly stated that the Golden Dome missile defense project, which Donald Trump is launching, is a direct threat to China and Russia. On the other hand, Xi Jinping once again refused Vladimir Putin's proposal to implement the Power of Siberia 2 gas project, even refused to discuss trade issues, and in general, no new economic agreements were signed. However, Russia announced a new discount on gas for China and also said that Russians will now be eating more Chinese chicken. Also, Russia is extending the visa-free regime for Chinese citizens and is asking Beijing for a loan to build a road to Iran and Afghanistan. Overall, China benefits from this summit between Putin and Xi Jinping, while Russia is once again being used merely as a bogeyman against the West. Although some aspects are still concerning. So, let's sum it up. We're sitting here ourselves. This is about Xi Jinping and Putin in this episode. My name is Alexi Pichi. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this YouTube channel, like the episode, and leave any comment you want. And friends, subscribe to my Telegram channel Pichi News. The link is in the description of this video. Also, in the video description, there's a link to Pichi News. This is a Ukrainian language YouTube channel, so if you want to watch my separate episodes in Ukrainian, be sure to go over, subscribe, and support an absolutely new, exclusively Ukrainian language YouTube channel. So now let's go through everything step by step. On Wednesday, at a meeting with Vladimir Putin in Beijing, Chinese leader Xi Jinping called relations with Russia a force and calm in the midst of chaos, just a few days after he hosted US President Donald Trump. Xi Jinping hinted at the escalating international situation and made a veiled jab at the United States. Next is a quote from Xi Jinping. The international situation is characterized by a mix of turbulence and transformation, while unilateral hegemonism and similar trends are spreading unchecked. Given these circumstances, China and Russia should enhance their strategic coordination. And it must be admitted that Xi Jinping received Vladimir Putin more warmly than Donald Trump. As a result, Putin and Xi Jinping signed a joint declaration on a multipolar world. And this is an important point that I will elaborate on. Let me immediately give you a telling quote from this declaration. Negative neocolonial tendencies, such as unilateral forceful approaches, hegemonism, and bloc confrontation, are gaining momentum. Fundamental, universally recognized norms of international law and international relations are regularly violated, global institutions are losing effectiveness, and there is a risk of returning to the law of the jungle. Shifts in the international landscape and global balance of power are accelerating. Efforts by some countries to control the world alone have failed. States have recognized that a new era in international relations has begun. These are words about how China and Russia are striving to build a new world order where the United States no longer holds the leading position. According to the declaration, Russia and China have committed to adhering to 4 basic principles and are calling on the international community to do the same. First, an open world for inclusive and mutually beneficial cooperation. Second, equal and indivisible security. That is, the security of one state cannot be guaranteed at the expense of the security of another. And here Xi Jinping contradicts himself. Because, let me remind you, Russia attacked Ukraine supposedly to ensure its own security. Well, Xi Jinping understands this perfectly well, but he's being disingenuous. Third, democratization of international relations and improvement of the global governance system. Democratization? Both Russia and China, they're actually on different sides. Oh, and fourth, global civilization, democratization, and diversity of values. The declaration condemns bloc confrontation and the expansion of military alliances and also expresses opposition to the use of human rights as a pretext for interfering in the internal affairs of other states. Once again, the Kremlin shoots itself in the foot. because Russia justifies its war against Ukraine by supposedly protecting Russian speakers in Ukraine, which contradicts this point of the declaration. Nevertheless, this summit once again showed that Xi Jinping sees Russia as a battering ram against the West. After all, it's one thing to sign declarations and quite another to actually fight. And so China is simply using the Russians to try to implement this very declaration while keeping its own hands clean. It got to the point that, during their joint criticism of US dominance, Xi Jinping and Putin condemned Trump's plan to create the multi-billion-dollar Golden Dome missile defense system. Here's a quote from the Kremlin. The parties believe that the American Golden Dome project poses a clear threat to strategic stability. These plans are completely contrary to the key principle of maintaining strategic stability, which requires an inseparable link between strategic offensive and strategic defensive weapons. Well, then China showed how it really feels about Russia. The main dream of the Kremlin is to launch the Power of Siberia 2 gas pipeline well to somehow curry favor. The Russian government simply goes ahead and builds further gas price cuts for China into the budget. They've tried to launch this gas pipeline for over 10 years, but it still hasn't worked out. Putin lowered the gas price for the Chinese to almost $224 per 1,000 cubic meters. This, I should note, is the lowest price since 2021. Compared to the current year, the price will decrease by 14% and will be 34% lower than what other Gazprom customers abroad pay. And Putin offered this discount for a reason. He wanted to appease Xi Jinping so that he would finally agree to the construction and launch of the gas project. But the 5th visit to China since the beginning of the war, and the 25th during Vladimir Putin's presidency, once again did not bring Russia the long-awaited agreements on the construction of the Power of Siberia 2 gas pipeline. The project under discussion has been talked about for more than 10 years since 2015, and it envisions increasing gas supplies to China to 100 billion cubic meters per year. There are still unresolved details. This was reported by President Putin's press secretary Dmitry Peskov after the dictator's talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Putin brought a large delegation with him to Beijing, including 5 deputy prime ministers, 8 ministers, and the heads of major corporations, including Gazprom and Rosneft. And during the visit, he spoke about the limitless prospects of Russian-Chinese cooperation and promised to supply China with oil, coal, and gas without interruption. As a result of the talks, Moscow and Beijing signed as many as 40 documents, but don't let that number mislead you. I'll give you some examples of these 40 documents a bit later. But interestingly, not a single one of these documents mentions either the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline or cooperation in the oil and gas sector. The stumbling block for the new gas pipeline, which is desperately needed by Gazprom after losing the European market, remains the price of gas. Although Putin has already lowered the price for the Chinese, Beijing is demanding an even greater reduction, down to a level close to the domestic Russian price. Let me remind you, Russia subsidizes domestic prices. That's about $50 per 1,000 cubic meters, and to give you a sense of scale, I'll just add one more figure. Before Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, Russia sold gas to Europe at 12 times the price. But of course, Putin does have some achievements after this summit. For example, Russians will now be consuming Chinese chicken. In one of the 40 signed documents, for example, it states that Russia plans to increase purchases of animal and plant products from China. In particular, cheap chicken breasts from China, where this part of the chicken simply isn't prized in the diet. It's considered a lesser cut. That's why the Chinese are ready to sell this byproduct to Russia on a large scale. In another one of the 40 documents, it is stated that Russia, following China, will extend the visa-free regime for Chinese citizens for 2027. So, just so you understand, there are 40 documents, but some of them are about things like this. And here's another document. This is the highlight of the meeting between Putin and Xi Jinping. According to the Deputy Prime Minister of the Russian Federation, Marat Kusnulin, Russia is begging and asking Xi Jinping for money to build a highway along the Caspian Sea, to Iran and further to the countries of South Asia, since, let me remind you, the rest of the world is closed to Russians after the war against Ukraine. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so financially by donating through the links and details in the description of this video or by using the QR code on your screen. Remember to subscribe to my Ukrainian language YouTube channel. The link is in this video's description. That's all for now. Take care and goodbye.